I speak these words for you, my friend, not just as a confession, but as a caution. In the dark hollow of our Falkreath sanctuary, under the red glow of the ever-burning candles, I learned that even family can hide a traitor behind a friendly smile. Suspicion coiled around us like a poisonous vine as one by one our carefully planned assassinations failed. Targets vanished, or inexplicably forewarned. Our brothers and sisters turned up dead or missing. Whispers echoed through these shadowed halls. Someone among the children of Sithis had betrayed us. As the newest initiate of the Dark Brotherhood at the time, I felt every sideways glance. One night, Astrid, our leader in that sanctuary, summoned us to the main hall. Her voice was low and dangerous as it carried over the flicker of the torches. She said, "Something foul festers in our midst, and until we find the source of these failures, trust no one." The air was thick with tension, and my heart was pounding. I'd only completed a few contracts, not quite enough to prove myself yet, but already I was bathed in suspicion alongside everyone else. I stood among my brothers and sisters, trying to appear calm. Nazir leaned against a pillar, jaw tight with anger at the insult to our reputation. Babette, that ancient child vampire, watched with wide, curious eyes. In the corner I caught a glimpse of Cicero, the keeper, twitching with a mad grin, as if he'd already sensed the betrayal. And most of all, I noticed Gorlan at Astrid's side. Gorlan, the seasoned assassin who had welcomed me to the family. He met my gaze and gave a small, reassuring nod. I clung to that gesture of trust he offered, not yet imagining how it would twist into a knife in my back. That night, sleep escaped me. In my small stone alcove, draped with crimson banners, I replayed my last failed contract. A target in Riften, who had slipped away moments before I struck. How had he known? Only a brother or sister could have leaked the contract. That ugly idea of a traitor, it gnawed at me. Being new, that made me vulnerable. If suspicion fell on me unfairly, I could easily become a scapegoat. I handled the onyx pendant of a black hand that hung under my cowl, a symbol of the Brotherhood Gorlan himself had given me after my first kill. "Welcome to the family," he'd said. I felt such a sense of pride and belonging. Now that pendant's weight reminded me of the trust I held for him, and the trust I needed to earn from others. So in that dark silence, I swore to myself I would find whoever was undermining us. Little did I suspect how close the betrayal lay, or whose face it wore. Just a few days later, Astrid summoned me in private. A new contract had come, one meant to test both my skill and my loyalty. Astrid gave me the details. "Your target is Ulrich Jonnings, a wealthy war profiteer in Windhelm. He's protected by hired guards. After so many failures, we cannot afford another. I'm sending Gorlan with you. 2 blades that ought to ensure success. Don't screw this up." She fixed me with a penetrating stare. "And watch each other's backs. If you notice anything unusual, report it to me immediately." Her implication was quite clear. This mission was as much about sniffing out the traitor as it was killing the mark. Perhaps both of us were on the list of suspects. Gorlan found me preparing to depart, his weathered face breaking into a confident grin beneath a dark cowl. "Windhelm," he mused, checking the edge of his sword. "Always cold, and always suspicious of outsiders. You better keep close to me. We'll be fine." I nodded, trying to hide my nerves. We slipped out at dusk through the black door. As soon as we were on the road, we were cloaked in night. The journey north was uneventful, though heavy with unspoken tension. Gorlan was mostly quiet, focused on the mission, or so I thought. I told myself Astrid's warning was just a precaution, that Gorlan had earned his reputation for loyalty over years, and I had nothing to fear from him. And so by the dawn, Windhelm's snow-caked walls loomed ahead. We entered the city inconspicuously among the group of travelers. A frigid air and grey stone streets set a somber mood, as if the city itself knew that blood was about to be spilled. We went the day gathering information on Ulrich's routine. It turned out he visited the Hall of the Dead every Sundas at dusk to pay respects at his late wife's crypt. One time he dismissed all but a single servant to be alone in his mourning. A perfect opportunity. The plan was simple. Attack him in the catacombs, where few prying eyes would be, and kill him. And so as we scouted the city, I felt a nagging unease tug at me. Once I noticed Gorlan slip away for a few minutes in the busy marketplace. I caught a sight of him in whispered conversations with a cloaked woman by a well. When I approached, the woman vanished into an alley. But Gorlan waved it off, claiming he was merely asking a beggar about guard patrols. His explanation seemed plausible. I chided myself for doubting him. This was Gorlan, after all. That was my mentor. He had always looked out for me. With the mission looming, I brushed aside my misgivings. I had to focus on the task. Night fell, and Windhelm grew quiet under a swirl of snow. We donned our dark Brotherhood armor and moved through the streets like two shadows. The time had come. Ulrich Jonnings, unsuspecting, descended into the city's catacombs with only a single servant carrying a lantern. Gorlan and I shared a final nod in the darkness outside the Hall of the Dead, and then slipped in after our target. My heart, it was thudding in my chest, but my mind, it was sharp and ready. One way or another, this night would bring answers. Night had settled full by the time Ulrich's servant led his master into Windhelm's Hall of the Dead. Gorlan and I ghosted in after him, silently. The catacombs were dimly lit by a few braziers. Shadows wreathed the stone tombs, and I could hear Ulrich's heavy footsteps ahead as he approached his wife's resting place. He dismissed his lantern-bearing servant to wait at the entrance of the chamber, preferring to mourn in solitude. That servant lingered nervously by the door, until Gorlan slid from the darkness behind him and clamped a gloved hand over the man's mouth. Steel flashed as Gorlan's dagger pressed to the servant's throat. I crept forward towards Ulrich, who knelt before a marble sarcophagus, whispering a prayer. That was my moment. I drew a sharp breath, steeling myself. Sithis, guide my blade. With practiced precision, I stepped behind Ulrich and drove my dagger toward the back of his neck. But suddenly, a shrill scream shattered the silence. echoing off those crypt walls. The servant? No, Gorlan had him under control. It sounded like a woman, and it was coming from the entrance. The effect was instant. Ulrich jolted up before my blade could find its mark. My dagger slashed across his shoulder instead of his neck, drawing blood, but not the killing blow. Ulrich roared in pain and surprise, fumbling for a weapon or any means of defense, and chaos erupted. Assassins! Guards! Ulrich bellowed at the top of his lungs, his voice booming through the stone holes of the dead. Cursing under my breath, I lunged to silence him. He was stronger than he looked. He swung a heavy urn that was part of the shrine, forcing me to duck or have my skull cracked. I slashed at his belly, and he staggered back, blood seeping through his fine coat. But before I could finish him, I heard the clang of steel behind me. 2 Windhelm guards, alerted by that scream and Ulrich shouting, charging into the catacombs. Gorlan intercepted them. I caught a glimpse of him in the dim light, moving with lethal grace as his blade found the chink in a guard's armor. 1 guard fell gurgling. The second lunged at Gorlan with a great sword, locking him in combat. Finish the target, then get out, Gorlan barked over his shoulder, his tone urgent. Heart-pounding, I turned to Ulrich. He was crawling, trying to escape down a side passage. I would not let the target live. Pouncing on him, I clamped a hand over his mouth and drove my dagger up under his rib cage. His eyes bulged. A wet choke escaped his throat. The war profiteer's struggles weakened, and finally he went limp. Contract complete. Ulrich Jonnings was dead. Time to go, Gorlan shouted. More bootsteps and shouts echoed from above. The rest of the guard patrol would be upon us at any moment, and we couldn't fight them all. Gorlan disengaged from the surviving guard with a vicious slash across the man's thigh, sending him to the ground. Without pausing, Gorlan dashed up an old stairway at the back of the catacombs, motioning for me to follow. I ran after him, leaving the crypt of death and our fresh kills behind. We emerged through a half-broken door onto Windhelm's upper ramparts, the city's wall. A gust of freezing wind and snow hit my face. Bells began to toll from somewhere in the city. An alarm spreading the word. Assassins in Windhelm. We sprinted along the wall's edge, leaping over a gap to an adjacent rooftop. Below I could see torches as guards swarmed like ants, searching for us in the streets. Gorlan was ahead of me, moving fast and sure. Too sure. He wasn't just fleeing randomly. He seemed to know exactly where to go. Instead of heading toward the city gates and our horses, he led us deeper along the rooftops. My breath billowed in the ragged clouds as I chased, and a terrible doubt began to crystallize in my mind. The scream. It had come at precisely the worst moment, perfectly timed to ruin my strike. Gorlan had been in charge of silencing the servant, yet somehow a cry was still loosed, and he was steering us away from the escape routes. A cold realization washed over me like snow. Astrid's warning rang in my ears. Trust no one. Gorlan, I called out, voice hoarse from the frigid air and adrenaline. He had paused on a flat warehouse roof, judging a jump to the next building. He had half turned toward me. I drew my sword, heart clenched in betrayal. You. It was you, wasn't it? You set this up. For a moment, only the howling wind answered. Gorlan's eyes narrowed, and under his cowl I saw a shadow of regret, or perhaps it was just annoyance at finally being found out. He sighed a plume of white breath. So, you finally see it. On that rooftop, under the pale moon and swirling snow, the last shreds of pretense fell away. I stood facing the traitor I had been hunting, and he wore the face of a mentor that I had trusted with my life. Steel hissed as Gorlan drew his sword. We stood atop that snow-dusted roof, two silhouettes in a deadly standoff. My heart thundered with hurt and fury. Why? I demanded over the wail of the wind. We are your family. Damn it, Gorlan. Why did you do it? Gorlan's lips curled in a snarl. Huh. Family. Astrid turned us into a mockery of what the Brotherhood was. I did this to cleanse our order, to return us to the old ways. Sacrifices are necessary, and you were just a pawn, a convenient scapegoat for all the failures I arranged. His admission sent a stab of pain through me, but it also stoked my anger into an inferno. I gripped my dagger. You betrayed us all for your own pride. There was nothing else left to say. We both knew that one of us would not leave this rooftop alive, and so with a furious cry, Gorlan lunged. Our blades met in a shower of sparks. He fought with masterful ferocity, each strike heavy with the intent to kill. I countered the best I could, but he had decades of experience on me. My arm ached with each parry. My boots skidded on the icy patches as I was driven back step by step. Snow clung to my eyelashes, and my breath came in gasps of exertion. He was strong, stronger than me, and I was getting tired. He feinted left and then slashed right. I was a moment too slow. His sword tip cut across my upper arm, drawing a hot line of blood. I gritted my teeth and retaliated with a low swipe at his legs. He jumped back, avoiding the worst of it, though I nicked his thigh. Gorlan bared his teeth, more enraged than hurt. You should have just died quietly, he barked, advancing again. He rained blows down upon me. I managed to block one, two, but the third strike knocked the dagger from my hand, sending it spinning into a drift of snow. In the same motion, Gorlan slammed his weight into me. I lost my footing and fell hard into my back. The impact drove the air from my lungs, and in an instant, Gorlan was atop me, pinning his knee into my chest. His sword raised high, a dark silhouette against the swirling snow and cloudy sky. Time slowed as death bore down. I struggled, arms numb, unable to throw him off, and his blade began to descend. Now, child, a whisper, cold and clear, pierced in the chaos. The voice was of an ancient woman echoing in my skull. In that heartbeat I knew. The Night Mother. Oh, my mother was with me. Summoning a final burst of strength, I swung my leg. My boot struck Gorlan's wounded thigh, making him falter with a grunt of pain. With a free hand, I reached to my ankle and drew out a small spare dagger hidden in my boot. The last resort. As Gorlan steadied for the killing blow, I drove the slim blade up under his ribs. He gasped, the sword falling from his grasp. For an eternal second, he simply knelt over me, crimson blood blooming on his tunic. And then he toppled sideways, collapsing onto the roof. I rolled away and scrambled to my feet, chest heaving, vision swimming. Gorlan lay on his back, mortally wounded, breath shallow. his eyes fixed on the night sky as snowflakes drifted onto his face. I retrieved my main dagger and loomed over him, fury and sorrow twisting inside me. I ought to kill him and be done with it. Execution for treason. But my hand trembled as I raised the blade. Still, the Night Mother's whisper rang in my mind. She had intervened so I might live, but also so the cold truth could come to life. If I killed Gorlan now, the Brotherhood might never know the full story. Astrid might suspect I invented this betrayal to cover my own failing. No, Gorlan had to face justice in the sanctuary. He had to confess with his own lips. I exhaled a long cloud of breath and lowered my dagger. Instead of a death blow, I slammed the pommel against the side of his head. He was already weak. The strike knocked him unconscious with a groan. Working quickly, I tore strips from a loose part of my leather armor and bound his hands. I found a length of rope coiled by a chimney, likely left by some rooftop thief, and lashed it around his legs for good measure. Gorlan was alive, bleeding badly, but not beyond saving. At least for now, his fate would be decided back home. I heaved him up and slung him across my shoulders. The weight of his body was heavy, but heavier still was the acknowledgement of betrayal. A brother, no more. Just a prisoner. He would answer to the Night Mother and Sithis for what he had done. And with a last look over Windhelm's roofs, guards still scurrying in confusion below, I slipped into the night, carrying the traitor back toward our sanctuary. By the next evening, I arrived, half dragging, half carrying the unconscious Gorlan. My wounds throbbed with each step as I approached the familiar black door. Silence, my brother. The password, and thus the door opened. Creaking slowly, I hauled the traitor inside to face the family he had betrayed. Inside, the others gathered quickly at the commotion. Astrid with a cold fury in her eyes, Nazir with his scimitar drawn in alarm, Babette and Cicero hovering at the edges in morbid curiosity. I dropped Gorlan's limp form onto the stone floor. Stunned gasps echoed as they recognized him, and saw the dark Brotherhood armor drenched in blood. Astrid, I panted, exhaustion evident in my voice. The traitor. It was Gorlan. He sabotaged the Windhelm contract, and then he tried to kill me. My words hung in the air, like a scent of blood. Astrid's face was a mask of disbelief and anger. "Explain yourself," she demanded. Gorlan groaned on the floor, stirring. Nazir moved to restrain him, yanking his arms back and pressing a dagger to his throat in case he resisted. I quickly recounted the night's events, the scream in the crypt, the ambush, Gorlan's rooftop betrayal. To bolster my story, I pulled a blood-stained parchment from Gorlan's belt pouch. I handed it to Astrid. "I found this on him, Astrid. Just look at it." She skimmed the letter, eyes widening with each line. Even from a step away, I recognized the Imperial seal at the bottom. It was proof of Gorlan's correspondence with our enemies, the Penitus Oculatus, promising them information on our sanctuary in exchange for gold and amnesty. Astrid's hands trembled as she finished reading. Rage and betrayal battled on her face. Nazir hauled Gorlan upright to kneel before Astrid. The wounded man coughed, blood flecking his lips. He was beaten, but what remained was a defiant glare. Astrid's voice was deathly quiet. "Is it true, Gorlan? Did you betray your brothers and sisters for a few coins. Gorlan let out a sickly laugh, and then grimaced at the pain it caused him. For coin, yes, and the old ways. You lost sight of our purpose, Astrid. I did what I had to. The Night Mother would thank me if she could. Astrid's hand lashed out, striking him hard across the face. You idiot. The Night Mother chose to save this loyal brother, not you. You are no family of ours. At a nod from Astrid, Nazir and Arnbjorn, who had appeared in the doorway drawn by the noise, dragged Gorlan away to the Chamber of Judgment. He did not struggle, perhaps knowing his fate was sealed. Cicero's manic giggle echoed after them. Sweet mother will feast tonight, the keeper sang under his breath. And then Astrid turned to me. Her hardened expression softened ever so slightly. You have done well. You uncovered the snake in our midst and upheld the Brotherhood's honor. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a rare gesture of genuine respect. We are in your debt, brother. Relief. It flooded through me. The weight of suspicion that had pressed on my chest for weeks was finally lifted. I was accepted. Truly one of them. Proved by blood. I nodded to Astrid, too exhausted and emotional to find words. Nazir clapped me on the back with a proud smile as he returned from securing Gorlan. Babette gave me a simple and solemn respectful nod. In her youthful eyes, I saw the ancient wisdom of a sister who understood how close we had come to ruin. In the aftermath, the sanctuary returned to its uneasy calm. Gorlan's muffled screams would later echo from the depths of the cave as the Brotherhood dealt with its traitor in the only fitting way. I did not watch his execution. It was enough to know the deed was done and the danger had passed. And now, in the quiet hours before dawn, I sit in the chamber of the Night Mother to recount these events to you. You understand why I had to share it. The dark shadows we live in are filled with both loyalty and treachery, and I've seen how even the closest bond can be poisoned from within. I look at the Night Mother's cold, smiling corpse, her presence oddly comforting. Cicero says she is pleased. In my heart I feel it too. It was her whisper that saved my life on that wind-elm rooftop, guiding my blade when all seemed lost. And I have no doubt that without her, there would be no tale for me to tell. Perhaps Sithis and the Night Mother have plans yet for me. Why else intervene? It is not my place to question, only to serve. Thanks for hearing my story. You've always been a confidant I trust, beyond shadows and silence. But take this lesson to heart. Trust in the family. But keep your dagger sharp and watch your back. Even in our cruel and shadowy world, honor among murderers is what keeps us alive. And betrayal, it is a poison we must never tolerate. May the Night Mother watch over us, and may Sithis accept our deeds in the void. Hail Sithis. Hail the Brotherhood. I must trust that you'll guard what I'm about to share with your life, my friend. For if the Dark Brotherhood ever learned of this, I'd be branded a traitor. And you know what happens to traitors. But you asked me once about the scar on my neck, and the nightmares that sometimes chase me from sleep. Well, perhaps it's time that I recounted that grim tale. Leaning close, I can't talk too loud. You never know who's listening. But I hope that you'll listen well. It all began as a routine contract, At least I thought it was routine. The Brotherhood received word of a mark, a reclusive nobleman by the name of Lord Dravis, living in an estate on those outskirts of Whiterun. As for the details, they were pretty scant. All we had was a name, a location, and the promise of a reward hefty enough to entice even the most jaded of assassins. Well, I should have sensed something amiss. Contracts paying that much gold usually involve politics or betrayal, not just some isolated noble. High reward meant high stakes. But of course, I'm sure you know greed and reputation often spur us onward. It's only a tool of the trade. A brother in the Brotherhood handed me a scrap of parchment with the target's name and the outline of his manor, and by nightfall I was already on the road, blade sharpened, and a mind focused on the kill. It was dark. I made my journey swiftly, avoiding the main roads. A chill wind whispered over the plains, carrying the distant scent of pine and wood smoke. By the time the moons hung high overhead, I had crested a hill, and there it was. I caught sight of the manor, its silhouette black against that starlit sky. The estate, once known to locals as Harron Manor after the family that built it, loomed out of the darkness ahead. It was an imposing structure, stone and timber, likely once the proud home of a wealthy lineage. But it was not what it used to be. It lay draped in decay and silence. The windows were dark and shuttered, and what little I could make out of the gardens was overgrown with tangled weeds. An iron gate, slightly ajar, creaked softly in the wind. No guards patrolled those grounds, unusual for a noble's house, but I didn't think too much of it. I welcomed the absence of the usual sentries. Perhaps it'll be an easy job. It promised a quick, quiet entry and a quick, quiet kill. At least, that's what I hoped for. That's what I thought. Crouching behind a cluster of gnarled trees, I watched the manor for a time, silently observing, searching for any signs of life within. And now and then, I caught a flicker of movement behind a high window. Just a curtain stirring or a shadow shifting beyond the glass. Too fleeting to tell who or what it was. But I knew that my target was inside, and he almost certainly aimed at this hour. Most would strike there and then, sure, slipping a dagger between sleeping ribs. But something stayed my hand from an immediate rush. A whisper of caution. Perhaps Sithus's own warning from the void. Something made me wary. Something wasn't right. And so I took my time, circling the perimeter, slowly, eyes scanning for hidden dangers. In my line of work, one learns to trust those gut warnings, and more often than not, they mean the difference between walking away from a job or being carried away to join the others in the void. Satisfied there were no lookouts lurking about, I slipped up to the front door. A quick twist of my picks, and the heavy oak door creaked open on its iron hinges. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust, and beneath it, a faint, coppery tang of old blood. The moment I crossed the threshold, a hidden pressure plate clicked under my boot. Instinct screamed out at me, and I flung myself to the side as a trio of iron bolts shot from a concealed slit in the wall. One bolt ripped a hot line across my upper arm. slicing through leather. A superficial wound, but enough to send some warm blood cascading down to my elbow. A warning well heeded. This place was rigged to kill. Watch my steps, that's for sure. And so I found myself in a grand foyer blanketed in darkness, the only light filtering in as thin, silvery beams through the boarded windows. Dust motes danced in the air. I could just make out a once opulent chandelier crashed down upon the floor, and the tattered remnants of tapestries on the walls. Moving silently, I skirted the edge of the foyer. My arm throbbed where the bolt had grazed me, but I paid it little mind. Better a scratch than a quarrel through the heart. Ahead, a hallway stretched into gloom, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me in the dim light. Each time the wind howled outside, the house answered with a low groan, as if it were a sleeping beast disturbed from its rest. The corridor opened into a wider gallery, overlooking a main hall below. I crept to the railing and peered down. The hall was faintly lit by the embers of a dying fire in the great stone hearth. There, slumped in chairs or sprawled on the floor amidst toppled furnishings, were several figures. For a panicked moment I thought I'd stumbled on a pile of corpses. But one began to stir, head turning to the side, and I caught the glint of open eyes reflecting the dull glow of the coals. Thralls, a whole pack of them, seemingly in some torpor. They might have been servants once, a housekeeper, a guard, maybe a coachman. Now they lay as if in stupor, awaiting their master's call. The sight banished any remaining doubt about what I was dealing with. Only a vampire could enthrall so many souls under his sway. Best to avoid walking into the hive. And so quietly, I started down the staircase at the end of the gallery, each step deliberate to avoid any creak in the floor. Halfway down, a loud crack echoed as one of the steps betrayed me. In an instant, several heads snapped toward the sound. My cover was blown. I had to act fast. With a mighty shove, I toppled the heavy armored mannequin from the landing above, crashing it into the thralls below. The impact sent them sprawling and raised a thunderous clamor through the hall. Seizing the moment, I leapt down the steps and fell upon them like a predator in the night. My dagger flashed relentlessly. The first thrall, a footman struggling to rise, died with a wet gurgle as I opened up his throat. Another, a burly stable hand, charged at me swinging a rusted sword. I ducked under his wild and frenzied slash and hamstrung him with a quick slice between the knee. He collapsed with a howl of pain, and one thrust through the heart silenced his pathetic groans for good. The remaining two servants hesitated, eyes glazed in confusion. One, a middle-aged woman in a tattered maid's uniform, suddenly bared her teeth and hissed, revealing unnaturally long canines. She rushed at me in a frenzy. I sidestepped her clumsy lunge and drove my blade up under her sternum. Her feral snarl turned into a blood-drenched choke as she crumpled to the ground pathetically. The last thrall, a giant butler clutching a splintered chair leg, trembled as he faced me alone. For an instant, his dull eyes seemed to flicker with fear, and then with a despairing cry, he hurled himself forward. Our weapons clashed in a brief, desperate flurry. He was strong in his mindless fervor, but no match for trained steel of an assassin. I parried his swing and riposted with a clean cut across his abdomen. The butler staggered, entrails spilling out through his fingers, shaking, panicking, and I ended his misery finally with a final slash across the neck. Chest heaving, heart pounding, I wiped sweat and blood from my brow as I surveyed the carnage below me. Broken furniture and bodies lay strewn about the foyer. I'd hoped to slip through the manor unnoticed. So much for that. If the vampire hadn't known of my presence before, he surely did now. As if on cue, a slow, mocking clap echoed from the darkness beyond the hall's dying fire. I spun around, blade at the ready, as a tall figure stepped from the shadows at the edge of the room. He was pale and regal, with a feral golden set of eyes and a predatory smile. It had to be him, the ancient vampire himself, Lord Dravus. So, he purred, the Vigilant of Stendar sends a hired blade to do what she cannot. His voice dripped with contempt. I felt a jolt of surprise at his words. So it was true. My mysterious client was a Vigilant of Stendar, using the Brotherhood to carry out her righteous revenge. The battle that followed was the most harrowing of my life. Dravus came at me with preternatural speed and strength, claws flashing. Before I could blink, he was upon me, and I was driven into a desperate dance for my life. He even had the gall to laugh and taunt me between onslaughts, demanding to know where my night mother was now to save me. We traded blows, each as savage as the next, steel ringing against the supernatural flesh. I slashed his fine silk robe and the pallid flesh beneath it, opening wounds that would have felled any mortal. But not him. The ancient fiend only snarled and pressed the attack. His pale skin hung in ragged, bloody tatters from dozens of cuts I'd inflicted, yet he seemed only to grow more enraged. With a casual backhand swipe, he'd send me flying. I crashed into an oak table, splintering it under my weight. Blood from a gash on my forehead trickled into one eye as I staggered up. A blast of frigid magic from Dravus's outstretched hand caught me mid-leap and sent me sprawling, my limbs momentarily numbed by a coating of frost. A heartbeat later, an unseen force struck me like a charging wolf, smashing against the stone wall. I felt something crack in my ribs as I fell amid the debris. I was injured, and I was injured badly. But I had to ignore the pain and that coppery taste of blood on my tongue. I fought to stay calm. I had to think. How was I going to best the vampire? My back hit the great hearth. No further to run. My hand brushed something on the mantel, a heavy iron poker, still warm from the fire's embers. I seized it and swung with all my might, just as Dravus closed in. The improvised weapon connected with his jaw in a burst of sparks, driving him back a step or two. He touched a hand to his split lip, eyes alight with fury. In a blink he lunged again. His clawed hand clamped down on my wounded shoulder as I squeezed until I cried out, the injury screaming out in protest. I spat a curse through clenched teeth and jammed the iron poker into his side, aiming for where his black heart would be. And there it was. Dravus roared, more beast than man, and recoiled, the pressure on my shoulder releasing as the iron bit deep. But the bloodlust of the vampire was not sated. With a snarl, he grabbed me by the neck from behind and hurled me clear across the hall. I slammed into the hard marble floor, the wind driven from my lungs. Before I could scramble away, he pounced on me, straddling my chest. Iron fingers pinned my arm to the floor as his fanged maw plunged around my throat. I felt a white-hot agony as his teeth sank deep into the juncture of my neck and shoulder. A strangled scream tore from my lips as he began to drink, each awful mouthful sending a wave of cold weakness through my body. My vision dimmed at the edges. Death was only moments away. But desperation, perhaps the will to live, or maybe even Sithis himself, lent me one final burst of resolve. My groping hand found a jagged piece of broken wood within reach, the splintered leg of a shattered chair. With a hoarse cry, I drove the makeshift stake straight into Dravis's chest. The vampire jerked back from my neck with an unearthly shriek, his grip loosening. I seized the moment, wrenching myself free from beneath him, and I mustered the last of my strength and slashed my blade in a wide arc. Steel met with flesh, and Dravis's head toppled from his shoulders, thumping down on that blood-soaked floor. His corpse crumpled, a black pool spreading around it. I staggered and nearly fell, hardly able to comprehend that the fight was over. It was done. I'd slain the ancient vampire. My eyes roamed the carnage around me. The thralls he had enslaved lay still where they fell. At least, in his death, they were finally free of his domination. But a wave of exhaustion then crashed over me. A new dread soon took its place. My neck and shoulder throbbed where he'd bitten me, the twin punctures still oozing blood, a cold lethargy already spreading in my veins. Sanguinare vampiris, the vampire's curse. If I did not find a cure soon, then I would be damned to that eternal darkness myself. Gathering every remaining ounce of will, I retrieved my weapons and staggered out of that accursed manor into the chill morning air. Dawn was breaking, pale light spilling over the distant, now snow-capped peaks, and painting the sky in hues of lavender and grey, sight I wish I had the time to enjoy. I had taken only a few unsteady steps from the threshold when I heard a crunch of boots on the frost-kissed grass, and I knew I was not alone. From behind a cloister of frost-limbed shrubs stepped a figure clad in mail and plate. A woman's voice rang out, firm, but not hostile. "Stay your hand. I mean you no harm." I turned, weary, my bloody dagger still clutched tight. My eyes struggled to focus through exhaustion and blood loss. A Nord woman, in a weather-beaten vigilant of Stendar uniform, stood a short distance away. A faded red sash crossed her chest over a gleaming steel cuirass marked with the symbol of a rising sun. She held a mace in one hand, but it hung low at her side, not raised to strike. Her other hand was open in a placating gesture. She looked between me and the manor's open doorway behind me, where the carnage within was just visible in the dawn's early glow. Understanding and a sorrowful relief dawned on her face. "It's done, then. The beast. It's dead." I nodded stiffly, lowering my dagger an inch. "Dead enough for now," I rasped, my voice raw. Oh, you must be the one who sent me here. The Vigilant. She approached carefully, nodding. Up close, I could see deep shadows of fatigue under her eyes and a recent gash in the side of her plated pauldron. Proof that she had faced Dravis before and lived. My name is Vera, she said quietly, Vigilant of Stendar. And yes, I carried out the Black Sacrament to see that monster destroyed. I prayed for someone capable. It seems my prayers were answered. Her gaze fell to the bloody bite wound at my neck and the gore-soaked rent in my shoulder armor. Stendar's mercy, you're injured. He bit you, didn't he? I couldn't help a bitter chuckle that turned into a wince. Takes more than a scratch to stop me, I muttered through the icy ache spreading from the wound bellied my bravado. I gestured towards her mace with my chin. So, what now? Plan to finish me off, now I've done your dirty work, cleanse the heretic and tie up the loose ends. My words were harsh, born of pain and mistrust, but I had to know where we stood. Vera's eyes widened, and she shook her head emphatically. No, you have my word, I did not come to harm you. Were it not against everything I stand for, I'd even offer you a place to rest. She managed even a half-weary smile. After all, you succeeded where I could not. I owe you a debt. A silence fell between us, broken only by the distant caw of a crow greeting the new morning. I sagged against the manor's outer wall, every muscle in my body protesting. Vera took a step closer, cautiously extending her free hand. You're so pale. That wound, it's the vampire's curse, isn't it? You don't have long. I set my jaw, fighting a wave of dizziness. I can still find a priest of Archay, or a cure potion in time. In truth, I wasn't sure I had the strength to even get to Whiterun, let alone survive days of infection. You don't have to. Vera slid her mace back into the leather loop at her belt and drew a small vial from her pouch, filled with a silvery concoction. Here, a cure for the infection. And if you'll allow me... She trailed off, already murmuring a soft incantation. Her gauntleted hand began to glow with a gentle golden light. I tensed at the sight of that holy light, the power of Stendar, in the hands of one of his faithful. It was said to burn away corruption and evil. What might it do to a murderer like me? I suppose we were about to find out. But the creeping chill in my blood was growing. Pride and fear gave way to necessity. I gave her a curt nod. Vera stepped forward and pressed her palm to the bite wound. Warmth flooded through the torn flesh. Painful at first, but then so soothing. I felt the foul vampiric disease sizzle and evaporate beneath that healing touch. The feverish ache in my bones ebbed. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And when she withdrew her hand, the bleeding from the bite had stopped, and only the twin puckered holes remained. Drink, she said, offering the cure vial. I uncorked it with trembling fingers and downed the contents in one swig. It tasted of juniper and something acrid, but I could immediately feel the lethargy receding from my mind. The looming hunger for blood that had been scratching at the edges of my thoughts faded to nothing, and I was free of the curse. Thank you, I managed, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. The words came out hoarse, but they were sincere. True gratitude was not something I often showed, at least certainly not to a Vigilant of Stendar. but Vera simply nodded, accepting it without pride or judgment. She glanced toward the manor's yawning doorway. "I will need to go in," she murmured. "There are rites to perform. The bodies of my comrades to recover and lay to rest." Her voice hitched on that last word. She had lost her friends here, friends who now lay among the corpses inside. And, I suppose, I felt an unexpected feeling of sorrow for her. I found myself quietly saying, "I'm sorry about your friends." The words slipped out before I could think. Sorry for her loss? Or sorry that a servant of death like myself had been required to avenge them? Perhaps it was both. And she met my gaze, surprise flickering in her eyes at my condolence. "They all rest with Stendar now," she said after a moment, bowing her head. "And because of you, so do all the innocents that monster would have claimed he had lived on." I wasn't sure how to respond. I hadn't done it for innocence or any noble cause. But hearing that, strangely it felt good. I gave a half shrug, trying to downplay the sudden tightness in my chest. I was paid to do a job, and I did it. Don't make more of it what it is. Vera studied me for a long moment. "As you say," she allowed, though there was a note of understanding in her tone. For a time we simply regarded each other in the growing light, a weary killer and a holy crusader, standing amidst the morning mist, all round the smells of blood. At last, Vera said almost apologetically, "We should go. Dawn's light is sacred. I'd consecrate this site while the first daybreak touches it." I nodded. It was time for me to return to the shadows. I had no intention of lingering for any consecration. My part here was done. With one last look at the fallen vampire's lair, I offered Vera a slight, respectful nod. Then I turned and limped off toward the tree line, the night's ordeal finally catching up to me. Behind me, Vera silently moved to the manor's entrance, preparing to perform her sacred rites as those first rays of the sun gently crept over the horizon. And that is the tale, friend. By the time I returned to the Brotherhood sanctuary, I had concocted a simple enough story of a successful kill with a few more injuries than expected. I left out any mention of vigilance or near-death transformations, of course. The others saw the fresh scar on my neck, but I let them believe it was just another war wound. Of course, in our line of work, scars and secrets walk hand in hand. And so you wanted to know why I sometimes jolt awake in the dark, fingers clutched to that scar. It's not the pain, or even the memory of fangs at my throat. It's the memory of that dawn, of standing on the knife's edge between light and dark, and realizing how blurred the line truly was. A vigilant of Stendar, and an assassin of Sithis. Two mortal enemies by creed, finding common cause in the blood of a greater evil. In that dawn light, for the briefest of moments we understood each other. In our own ways, we held each broken our sacred codes for the sake of a greater good. Call it respect, call it a truce, perhaps even a kingship born of survival. Whatever it was, it seemed to change something in me. And so there you have it, the story behind the scar. But just promise me one thing, will you? You better keep this tale close, and not speak of it to anybody else. If the wrong ears in the Brotherhood heard of Maya, cooperation with a vigilant. Well, it would be my blood decorating the floor next, and I rather like my blood safe and sound in my veins. Well, we share a long silence now, the crackle of the hearth between us. And then you reach out and clasp my shoulder. I know my trust was not misplaced. This tale remains only between us, a secret sealed in blood and brotherhood. Gather close, my friend, and listen. I begin, my voice low as the tavern's hearth crackles with comforting fire. Shadows dance on the wooden walls. The scent of burning pine mingles in with the bitter aroma of ale. You lean in from across the table, nursing that drink of yours, eyes reflecting the flame. I can see your curiosity. After all, I suppose I did promise to tell you of one of my darkest trials. A tale of vanished faithful and hidden horror in the misty marsh of Hjalmarch. I remember it vividly, as if the marsh's chill still clings to my bones. Back in those days, I was a vigilant of Stendar, a wandering paladin, sworn to root out the unholy, those filthy Daedra, all creatures of darkness that prey on the mortal people. My life was dedicated to Stendar's light, and to the protection of the innocent. Mercy to the innocent, judgment for the wicked. That was the creed that I carried in my heart. And so when whispers reached the Order of a strange menace in the town of Morthal, without hesitation I volunteered. The rumors spoke of worshippers disappearing from the chapel in the dead of night, faithful souls vanishing without a trace. People were talking. Some said the divines had abandoned that swampy corner of Skyrim. Others whispered of curses, or even witches in the midst. But I suspected something worse. I had a feeling, the kind of evil that wears a friendly face, but bares its teeth when you least expect it. Morthal, a dreary, remote town, crouched on the edge of a miserable and endless marsh. I arrived at dusk. As pale sun bled out behind the clouds, and a veil of fog crept from the stagnant waters. The dirt path into the town was slick with mud, and each step I took seemed to echo in the uncanny silence. No laughter of children, no chattering from doorsteps, only the croak of distant frogs, and the whisper of a wind through those half-dead branches. The air is thick with peat and decay. The oppressive damp that sank into my cloak, I couldn't take it. I pulled it tighter, uttering a quiet prayer. Stendar, grant me your warmth and vigilance. My breath misted before me, an involuntary shiver ran through my spine, and that had little to do with the cold. As I passed through the first hovels at the town's edge, weary eyes peered from shuttered windows. The people of Morthal were no strangers to hardship. They'd been through a lot. Their Jarl, Igrod Ravencrone, was said to be a wise woman who communed with spirits and visions. Perhaps she'd foreseen my coming. Regardless, the common folk recognized a vigilance armor, the silver symbol of Stendar on my gauntlets, the gleam of the blessed mace at my side. But instead of relief, their faces showed fear and hopelessness. They'd seen too much already. I recalled stories only a few years past. A vampire and his brood had nearly made Morthal their feeding ground, until a wandering hero intervened. Morvath. I think that was the fiend's name. A sinister legend, even among my order. But his lair had been burned out and purged. Yet here we are again. Evil is like the marsh water. You bail it out, but it seeps back in, slowly from below. Lantern Light beckoned from the town center as I approached. The one inn, Moorside Inn, offered a brief respite and maybe some information. Before diving into my investigation, I needed to understand all I could. Pushing open the door, I was greeted by warm air carrying the scent of stew and a low murmur of voices. A few heads turned, and they nudged further when they noticed the vigilant symbol upon my chest. I gave a polite nod to the room. I might be a paladin, but a stranger still, and quietly took my seat near the hearth to dry my damp boots. The innkeeper, Jonah, approached with a cautious smile. "Welcome to Moorside, traveler. What brings you to Morthal at this hour?" She likely already guessed. A town this small, news of missing people, and a vigilance arrival. Yeah, they must be connected. I answered softly. "I've come about the disappearances. I'm here to help you." At that, a middle-aged man at the bar barked a humorous laugh. "Help her? Stendar's mercy finally extends to us humble swamp folk." His voice carried bitterness. Jonah shot him a warning glare. I stood and faced him, keeping my voice level. "Stendar's mercy extends to all who need it. I intend to find whoever or whatever is responsible for your troubles." The man, I later learned, his name was Yorick, a hunter, spat into the fire and muttered, "Yeah, we'll see." The tension was thick, but another voice, raspy with age, broke it from a corner. "You must speak with Brother Thane at the chapel," an old woman croaked. She rocked in her chair by the wall, wrapped in a threadbare shawl. "He's the one who tends the shrine. Poor souls, lost near half his flock in a month." I inclined my head in thanks. That was exactly the plan. I politely asked if anyone could tell me more. The old woman's milky eyes narrowed and she said, "People go to pray, child. They go to pray, but they don't come back. The gods don't answer in Morthal. Or maybe something wicked does instead." A hush fell. Jonah made a protective symbol over her heart, whether to ward off evil or appeal to the divines. Perhaps both, trying her luck. And my jaw tightened. Wicked answers in their place. I had studied enough unnatural lore to suspect what that could mean. Daedra sometimes impersonate gods to trick the faithful. And vampires. Vampires often haunt the fringes of society, where folks won't be missed too much. After finishing a bowl of hot stew offered by Jonah, and trading a few more whispered questions with the patrons, I left the inn. Night had settled, the fog thicker than before. Only a few of the flickering torches lit the muddy paths. I navigated towards the chapel, guided by a wooden sign marked with the symbol of Arche, a skull in a circle, pointing down a side lane. Arche, the divine birth and death, was reversed in this remote place. His priests tend the dead and comfort the bereaved. It made sense. Where better for a coven of undead to hide than beneath the temple of the god who loathes undeath? The thought unsettled me. I quickened my pace. At the very edge of town stood the chapel of Morthal, where the last dry ground met the mire. It was a modest structure of timber with a small steeple. Its shingled roof was blanketed in moss and the walls bore dark streaks of years of damp. Yet the stained glass window above the entrance glimmered with arcane symbol, and I took heart from that sign of faith shining against the gloom. I found Brother Thane inside, on his knees before the altar, a portly, balding man with kind but bloodshot eyes, clearly exhausted and distraught. At the sound of my footfalls on the wooden floors, he arose, wiping his eyes hastily. "Stendarr bless you for coming," he whispered, recognizing my attire at once. The chapel's interior was simple, a few rough pews, candles flickering along the walls, and an altar draped in a faded cloth. A sweet haze of incense hung in the air, not quite masking an underlying coppery tang. You know the one, the faint smell of blood. My senses sharpened. A vigilant learns to notice these things. They're not there for no reason. And after a gentle greeting, Brother Thane poured out his woes. In a hushed, trembling tone, he recounted how over the past month, one by one, members of his small congregation vanished. First it was old Jofthor, who came for evening prayers and never returned. Thane said, voice quavering. Then Hagar, a young mother, and 2 nights past we lost Alva, one of our chapel maidens as well. His eyes brimmed with tears. At the mention of Alva, I recalled that name from the tales of Morthal's past. A woman enthralled by Movarth, years and years ago. Could it be the same Alva, fallen victim again, or just a cruel coincidence of name? Brother Thane continued, wringing his hands. We searched everywhere, vigilant. The marsh, the woods, every hut, every hollow. It's as if they were swallowed by the fog. No tracks, no cries for help, nothing. He looked at me desperately. At first I thought perhaps wolves or a marsh troll might be dragging people away, but there'd be signs of that. I finished the thought for him. Blood. Bodies. I know. He nodded. But there was none. Only Arce's silence. He lowered his head, guilt and helplessness etched on his features. I placed a gauntleted hand on his shoulder. Take heart, brother. Stendarr has not forsaken you, nor has Arce, for I am here. Sometimes the gods send their servants as answers to our prayers. I infused my voice with confidence and compassion, but in truth, a knot of unease had lodged in my gut. People vanishing without a trace often pointed to an otherworldly cause. I already suspected the hand of a vampire, or worse, a coven of them. Yet I did not want to alarm the priest more than necessary. Brother Thane sniffled and straightened up, grasping at hope. I keep the chapel open each night, in case any of the lost find their way back, or in case I can catch whoever's doing this. He glanced toward the dark corners of the hall. But, vigilant, I fear I'm being watched. It's like, well, sometimes I feel eyes on me from the shadows. The candles guttered slightly as he spoke, as if a draught passed through, or something unseen had stirred. My skin prickled under the mail. Instinct whispered that his fears were not unfounded. I drew forth a small silver charm from beneath my cuirass, an amulet of Stendarr, and held it aloft. In a soft chant I invoked a minor ward. The charm glowed, casting a gentle light into the recesses of the chapel. But in that glow, something caught my eye on the wooden floor by the far wall. A tiny splash of crimson. Blood, dried to a single dark drop. Nearby the wall's paneling bore a few subtle gouge marks as if scratched by fingernails, and my heart quickened. Brother Thane, I asked quickly, did you clean the chapel today? He blinked at the question. Yes, just after first light. I do that every morning. Why? I beckoned him over and showed him the evidence, to which his eyes widened in pure terror. The blood speck had definitely not been there at dawn, and that meant that sometime during the day, when the chapel was empty, someone's blood had been spilled. He crossed himself with Arke's sigil and whispered a prayer. "What do you suspect?" he asked, voice barely audible. I met his gaze. Honesty, that was a risk, but I couldn't leave him ignorant. I suspect a vampire, or even a coven of them, have made this place their hunting ground. It all fits. The disappearances, the lack of traces, the way you feel watched. They could be hiding beneath us, or nearby, using secret paths, possibly an old crypt under the chapel. Thane grew pale, shock and disgust contorting his facial features. Vampires? In Arke's house? No. How could such filth get... He composed himself, resolve hardening. Okay, what must we do? I will not allow these abominations by the divines to defile this holy place, or harm another innocent. I have to admit, I admired his courage. Few unarmed priests would dare stand against the undead. I put my hand on his shoulder. We will stop them, I assured him, but we must be cautious. I need to find their lair, preferably in daylight. That's when they're their weakest. Rushing in now at night, that would play right into their hands. He nodded. The worry still lined his brow. His gaze drifted to a side alcove where a locked chest sat. Brother Thane hurried over and produced a key from his robe. From the chest, he reverently lifted out a large chunk of gleaming silver attached to a cracked wooden haft, a broken war hammer head engraved with divine symbols. He hefted it up with both hands and offered it to me. This is a relic, a fragment of Stendar's hammer, he explained, voice reverent. I've been keeping it here for generations. It was said to crush 1,000 abominations in the hands of a righteous warrior. If vampires defile Arke's ground, let them face the wrath of Stendar. I ran my fingers over the etched symbols on the relic. Despite its age, it emanated a subtle warmth that seeped into my weary bones. A tingling strength filled my arm. Brother, I am honored, I said quietly. I wrapped it in its cloth and secured the heavy fragment to my belt. The extra weight was a burden I gladly bear. With this, we'll make them regret ever coming here. Brother Thane nodded and managed a hopeful smile. Before I departed, I asked if the chapel or graveyard had any hidden crypts or passages. And sure enough, Brother Thane mentioned an old catacomb beneath the chapel where long-dead priests were interred, though it hadn't been used in decades. The entrance was outside, around the back of the chapel, but he rarely went there aside from occasional maintenance. My pulse quickened at that. A likely place for evil to lurk, that's for sure. I told him to keep the chapel doors barred and not invite anyone in until he heard from me again. Even if I knock, test me with a prayer, I said. Vampires can deceive the eye and mind. Trust only the holy words of Stendar. He agreed solemnly. Stepping back out into that foggy night, I took a moment to survey the graveyard behind the chapel. The mist clung to the ground, swirling around the weathered gravestones. Something caught my eye. One of the old tombstones had fresh scratches at its base, and the earth around it was disturbed. Crouching, I brushed aside wet moss and discovered a small cloth bundle hidden in a hollow. Inside were peculiar items, a silver ring bearing a Daedric rune, a few human teeth, and a pinch of dried nightshade. I stiffened as I recognized the rune on that ring, the curved, claw-like symbol of Molag Bal, the Daedric prince of enslavement and vampires. A cultist's token, perhaps, or an old vampire's keepsake. But either way, it was a confirmation that this was no random monster. It was darkness steeped in ancient and unyielding evil. Teeth and nightshade, ingredients for dark rituals, and that ring of Molag Bal. I muttered a curse under my breath and pocketed the ring as evidence. The rest I wrapped back up and replaced, hoping perhaps to catch someone returning for it later. Either way, my course was set. I whispered my fervent vow under the weeping trees of the graveyard. By Stendarr's will and Arkay's law, I will cast out this unholy darkness. And with that, I left the chapel grounds and headed back toward the inn, my mind already strategizing how to track and destroy these hidden fangs of the night. Gods, guide my path. The hour was late, past midnight, and I returned to Morthal's dimly lit center. The streets were empty and silent but for the distant croak of frogs in the marsh. But plan or no plan, I couldn't face a coven alone without more information. The Jarl's guards had found nothing. And if a vampire was at work, it would avoid open detection. They're smart, resourceful, as much as they are cunning. I needed insight from someone who knew the shadows of this town. In that line of work, it often meant turning to the local underbelly, those who operate in darkness for their own gain. It's an unsavory route. I don't like taking it, but knowledge is a weapon as keen as any blade, and I would use every tool that Stendarr allowed. I entered the Moorside Inn once more, now nearly deserted. Jonah was wiping down the bar, and one last patron snored softly in a corner. As I made for the stairs to see if any lodgers or riff-raff might be about, a low voice murmured from a shadowy booth. Looking for someone, vigilant. I turned, hand subtly on my mace, and peered at the speaker. In the dim light I saw a lean Nord man in a tattered leather coat, a hood pulled over his sandy hair, scruffy beard framing a roguish smirk. He leaned forward and gestured for me to join. Jonah eyed us with a frown, clearly disapproving. "Don't waste the vigilant's time, Elvin," she scolded at him from across the room. The man gave a dismissive wave. "Just offering a friendly word, Jonah. No harm in conversation, surely." I approached, cautiously. "Elvin, is it?" He nodded theatrically. "Elvin Mosley, at your service. A humble trader in rare goods." He winked. I could smell cheap mead and marsh water on him. Smuggler, probably. Maybe exactly what I needed. "Listen, Elvin, you know why I'm here. Do you know anything about these disappearances?" He steepled his fingers. "I might. Maybe. Information has value, of course. But I'm a little more civic-minded than you'd think. Let's say I'd like to help my little town here, and maybe you could help me with a little problem of my own." "Of course." I cocked an eyebrow. "Go on, Elvin." Elvin glanced over at Jonah, seeing if she was busy, and then lowered his voice. "Listen, Vigilant, the truth is, I move goods through Yarmarch, you see, off the record. The guards have a small bounty on me for some misunderstanding about taxes, you see. You help me clear that up, and I'll be your personal guide to the less traveled corners of this swamp. I know 'em all. I can see and hear things that the Jarl's men overlook. Ordinarily, I'd loathe to bargain with a lawbreaker, but if he truly had knowledge that could save lives, exceptions would have to be made. If your information helps me save those people and put an end to what's taking them, I'll speak to the Jarl about your bounty, and you'll have some coin for your trouble too. But by the divines, if you lead me astray— I pointed my fingers, leaving the threat hang. His smirk faltered a bit, and he replied, Hey, I understand, Vigilant. No tricks. I'm part of this town too. I want this evil gone as much as anyone. Let's help each other out, He motioned for me to sit, and I did, albeit on edge, and he began in a conspiratorial tone. 2 nights ago, I was out on the marsh, late, moving some cargo by boat, and that's when I saw it. Over near the chapel's graveyard, a light bobbing in the fog. Naturally, I doused my lantern and drifted closer, quiet as a slaughterfish. His eyes glinted. I saw 2 figures by the crypt entrance behind the chapel. One was carrying something, and I realized it was a person, limp over their shoulder. Gave me a right scare, it did, let me tell you. But I stayed hidden and watched. The second figure moved aside a bunch of brush and opened a hatch in the ground that I never knew was there. They climbed down with the body. I didn't stick around after that. I figured whatever it wasn't good. My pulse quickened. He had described exactly what I'd suspected. So there is a hidden entrance to the catacombs. I knew it. Elvin nodded. I looked for it by daylight, but damned if I could find it under all the mud and moss. Whoever's using it knows how to cover their tracks. He leaned forward, lowering his voice further. Listen, Vigilant, we've got to move fast. If those people are alive down there, there's no telling what's happening to them. And if they're dead, well, we better bring a few extra stakes, don't you think? He attempted grim humor, but I could see the concern behind his eyes. I agreed the time was critical. My plan had been to wait for dawn, catch the vampires vulnerable. But if captives were in imminent danger, every second mattered. Fine, we'll go now. Quietly and carefully. Show me this route. And Elvin, you have a weapon, right? Bring it. You might need it. Elvin flashed a quick grin and patted a short steel sword at his hip. Of course, Vigilant. I never leave home without it. Outside, the air was clammy and cold. A heavy silence lay over the marsh, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Elvin led me behind the inn to the water's edge, where a narrow skiff was tethered. By water's the quickest, less likely to be noticed too. We stepped in, and he pushed off with the pole. The boat glided over the black water, reeds whispering against the hull. I kept my mace across my lap, eyes scanning in the darkness. A faint glow of faint stars was all that lit our way. The moons hidden behind the clouds. As we drifted, I broke the silence. Why do this, Elvin? If you are what you say you are, a smuggler, why risk your neck for this? I don't understand. I had to know if his motives were trustworthy. He shrugged, not meeting my gaze. Morthal may be a Blackwater, but it's home, he said. Folks here, they're a tough breed, but they're good people. I don't fancy some monster picking us off one by one. If anything, it's bad for business. He forced a chuckle and then sighed. Truth is, Vigilant, my brother was among those taken years back by that monster Movarth. I never saw him again. I won't let something like that happen again if I can help it. The admission sounded earnest enough. I offered a nod of understanding, and I let the matter rest. The marsh parted around us like a murky curtain. Through wisps of fog, the dark outline of the chapel's back wall emerged. We grounded the skiff softly on the bank of mud and reeds. The chapel stood silent, its windows dark. Only the gentle gurgle of swamp water and the distant call of a night bird broke the stillness. Elvin disembarked and beckoned me to follow up a small rise toward the graveyard. We moved slowly, crouched low. My heart thudded against my ribs, adrenaline flooding me in anticipation of what may lay ahead. Behind an old stone shrine in the graveyard, half hidden by ferns, Elvin pointed out a patch of ground that looked slightly less overgrown. It's here, he mouthed. I knelt and felt around. My fingers found a small metal ring handle caked in grime. Beneath the draping moss was a wooden trapdoor, so well concealed I couldn't believe that I had missed it earlier. I cast a final glance at Elvin, who had his sword drawn, to give me a resolute nod. Gently I pulled the hatch open. It gave a low creak, and we both winced and held still. No immediate reaction from below. A foul draught exhaled from the darkness, a stench of damp stone and decay. The faintest orange glow danced on the rough-hewn walls of a staircase leading down, and there, echoing up from the depths, a muffled cry. A human voice, weak and pleading. My blood surged. We had to move, but blindly rushing in. No, we can't. I whispered to Elvin. Stay close, but let me go first, and whatever happens, don't let them cut off our escape. He nodded his head. I descended, mace in one hand. A small ward spell at the ready in the other. Each step was slick under my boots. The passage was earthen at first, then turned to old stone. A dozen steps down I could peer into a chamber, two figures visibly by a brazier's light. A hunched old woman in tattered gown humming a strange tune, and a tall, gaunt man with a predatory posture. My heart skipped. A quick glance at that man's face showed it eerily similar to Elvin's profile. But before I could fully process that, he spoke in a low hiss. The Vigilant took the bait. He'll be here soon. The old woman cackled under her breath. Betrayal. My mind reeled, even as my body acted. In that instance, I knew that the smuggler had led me into a trap. Perhaps he was a vampire all along, or enthralled by them. Either way, it doesn't matter now. That gaunt creature wearing his face confirmed my worst fears. I inched back up the stairs, heart pounding. Elvin, the one behind me, was still lingering near the top. Had he heard the exchange? Was he about to stab me from behind? I had to act fast and decisively. I turned to the silhouette of Elvin above and said softly, All clear so far. Come on down. He descended eagerly, perhaps thinking me oblivious. My muscles tensed with righteous fury, and when he drew near I exploded into action. I dropped my lantern and lunged at him, slamming him against the dark wall with my forearm at his throat. You treacherous cur! I snarled, but the words gave way to struggle. His eyes flared red in the gloom, fangs flashing as he let out a feral hiss. So the friendly smuggler guise was a shed. With preternatural strength, he grappled me, nearly wrenching my arm away. But I had the advantage of armor and surprise. I brought my steel-clad knee up to his stomach and then cracked my mace across his face. Bones splintered, and he howled, staggering on the steps. Below, the creatures heard the commotion. A shriek of rage echoed up the old woman's voice, now a shrill, otherworldly screech. In an instant, the chamber erupted into chaos. The gaunt man with Elvin's likeness sprang towards the stairs with unnatural speed. Another shape, a younger woman with wild eyes and blood-stained lips, emerged from the shadows, claws bared. I had only a moment before they were upon me. The wounded vampire at my feet, Elvin's doppelganger, snarled and grabbed at my leg, trying to topple me. I answered with a swift downswing of my mace, crushing his skull against the stone step. His body went limp and silent, but there was no time to catch my breath. The others were now rushing up upon me. I backed up the last few steps into the open night air, unwilling to be cornered in that tunnel. The gaunt vampire was first to emerge, a rustled sword in hand. He slashed at me viciously. I parried with my mace, sparks flying as metal met metal. Behind him, the feral young woman crawled out on all fours, hissing like a disgusting animal. And just behind her, slowly and regally, the old woman ascended, her eyes gleaming in the darkness, filled with a crimson and ancient malice. Outnumbered 3-1 under the pale starlight, I circled to keep them in view. The gaunt swordsman feigned left and then thrust at me. I turned it aside, repulsing with a bash of my shield. I had drawn it back from my back as I retreated. The blow caught his jaw. He grunted in pain. The feral girl darted to my flank, forcing me to pivot. Swiped at my face and I reeled back. Her claw still raked across my cheek, drawing blood. Pain flared hot, and I gritted my teeth. The old one finally stepped fully out of the crypt, unfazed by the chill mud under her bare feet. "Fool," she spat, voice echoing with ancient power. "You think you can challenge the mistress of this coven, Vigilant?" With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a bolt of crackling purple energy, a spell of vile conjuration or pure force. I couldn't tell, but it smashed into my chest like a giant's fist, sending me skidding backward. I kept my footing, barely, boots plowing furrows in the muck. My shield and arm went numb from the impact. "Your blood will taste sweet, Vigilant," the old vampire groaned. "Molag Bal thirsts." At that time, a cold fury ignited in me. "Stendarr rebuke you, hag," I shouted. They advanced as a pack, confident now that I was on the back foot. The gaunt one led with another flurry of sword strikes. I parried twice, thrice, his technique frenzied but relentless. In the corner of my eye, I saw the young woman slinking around to my right, and the matriarch raising her hands to cast another curse. Time slowed, in the way it does in these kinds of battles. Instinct and faith had to guide me now. As the swordsman lunged again, I sidestepped and smashed my mace into his knee. The joint crumpled with a sick crunch. He howled and collapsed, no longer a threat, save for his grasping arms. The wild-eyed girl seized the opening and sprang at my throat. I dropped my mace and caught her wrists, stopping those clawed hands from inching at my neck. Oh, she was unnaturally strong. Face inches from mine, snarling and fangs snapping like a rabid dog. Her breath reeked of death and blood. With a roar, I summoned a surge of strength and head-butted her. The edge of my steel helm cracked against her skull, and she reeled back in a daze. but victory would still be hard-fought and far off. In that heartbeat, the elder vampire finished her spell. Black tendrils of shadow snaked from her fingertips and ensnared me. Entropic bindings. I'd heard of this magic, a conjuration of pure despair. I couldn't move. My limbs felt like lead. My spirit suddenly weighed down by dread. The crone stepped in closer, a cruel smile on her withered, wrinkled lip. Do you feel it, Vigilant? Feel the futility of your cause? My arm slackened. The horror crept into my mind. Images of endless night, of innocence I'd failed to save, of myself turning into a mindless thrall. No, I would not let her win. Summoning every shred of will and the ember of divine grace in my soul, I forced out a prayer through clenched teeth. Stand firm. Give me strength. The amulet at my neck pulsed with divine light. A burst of warmth and courage flowed through me, shattering the illusion of despair. The spectral bindings evaporated into mist. The old vampire's eyes widened in surprise. Rare to see a Vigilant break such a spell. And I did not waste the moment. My mace lay at my feet. Instead of bending to grab it, I thrust out my now free hand toward the crone. Golden light swirled around my gauntlet as I cast Stendar's aura, a brilliant flash of holy energy radiating from my body. It was a lesser miracle. I had practiced many times, and against creatures of darkness, it was like sunlight concentrated. The effect was immediate. The matriarch shrieked and staggered back as the radiance burned her flesh away. The young vampire, just recovering from my head blow, was caught in it as well. She shrieked and fled back toward the open hatch of her lair, smoke wisping from her burning skin. Even the fallen swordsman moaned as the light seared him where he crawled in agony. Now it was my time. I had to advance. I strode towards the crone and with one fluid motion tore the bundled relic from my belt. I unveiled the fragment of Stendar's hammer, the engraved silver head catching the brazier's distant glow. The old vampire's expression twisted from rage to fear at the sight of that holy artifact. I roared, "For Stendar!" Both my hands clasped around the relic's shaft and swung with every ounce of my righteous fury. This heavy fragment struck her square in the chest. There was a sound like thunder as divine power surged through the weapon. The crone's ribcage collapsed inward, and she was hurled away, crashing into the stone altar behind her. A flash of light burst upon impact, Stendar's wrath made manifest. When my vision cleared, the ancient vampire laid crumpled and charred, the final death at last claiming her. Her body disintegrated into ash before my eyes, the dark magic sustaining her finally severed, and silence finally fell over the night. The only movement was the lazy swirl of ash in the air, and my own ragged breathing. The gaunt swordsman half crawled towards me despite his shattered knee, let out a gurgling hiss, trying to rise. Whatever unholy vigor had driven him was fading with his mistress's destruction. I limped over to his prone form and with grim resolve brought the fragment of the hammer down on his skull as one would crush a venomous snake. And his skull crunched, and he burst into dust, an anguished wheeze escaping as the last of his undeath finally came to an end. It was over. By Stendar's mercy, I stood still, covered in blood, battered, broken, but victorious. The profane darkness that had dwelt beneath the chapel was destroyed. And then I noticed it. The first pale light of dawn creeping into that sky. I descended once more into the crypt, careful, ready for any last threat. The brazier still flickered below, casting grotesque shadows over the stone walls, and the old crone's remains were nothing but ash drifting in that damp, disgusting air. Near the back of the chamber, I found what I prayed for. 2 terrified villagers chained to the wall, shaken but alive. They were weak and gaunt from abuse, but they were breathing. A young man and woman, Hafnar and Fiona. They gasped out their names as I gently reassured them. Both of them had puncture wounds at their necks, but the bleeding had stopped, likely kept alive as a supply of fresh blood. With a grunt of effort, I shattered their chains with the cobblestone and pommel of my dagger. "You're safe now. It's over." Fiona collapsed against me, sobbing in pain and relief. Hafnar, eyes sunken but grateful, murmured thanks over and over, clutching at my hand. I gave them what water and dried apples I carried, urging them to take small bites. A faint noise from above made me tense, the creak of wood and distant voices. And then I realized, Brother Thane. He must have rallied help. I'd been gone a couple hours at least, and the alarm bell I'd heard during the battle likely woke the town. With Hafnar leaning on me and Fiona holding my arm, I guided them up the stair and out of that accursed hole. Daybreak greeted us, with a crimson-tinted mist over the graves. At the edge of the yard I saw Brother Thane hurrying forward with a lantern, flanked by 2 of the Jarl's guards and a handful of the braver townsfolk clutching farming tools. Upon seeing us emerge, a cheer and a few choked sobs broke the silence. Thane rushed to Fiona's side, helping her stay upright, while the guards supported Hafnar. "The vampires? Are they?" one guard asked, sword trembling in his hand. "Gone. Yes, they're gone," I assured him, exhausted but triumphant. "The lair is purged. The nightmare is over." Brother Thane looked past me at the gaping hatch and the signs of struggle around it. Scorch marks, ashes, and the crumpled corpse of a vampire whose knee I'd smashed in. He made a sacred sign over his chest. "Arcade be praised, and Stendar's justice be done." Then he clasped my hand tightly. Words failed him, but the gratitude in his eyes spoke true. He quickly beckoned people to help the freed captives back into the chapel for warmth and healing. And within the chapel, the survivors were laid on pews and wrapped in blankets. A few more villagers trickled in, drawn by the news and the tolling bell. Hafnar's wife flung her arms around him, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. Fiona's aged father clasped my hands, choking out thanks between quiet sobs. I offered what healing prayers I could, and Brother Thane administered potions of cure disease to ensure no cursed vampirism would take root in them. Jarl Igrid Ravencrone herself arrived not long after, having been roused from her own slumber. The wizened ruler surveyed the scene with her pale, insightful eyes. "So, it is true," she said softly. "Darkness dwelt between our very feet, and you have banished it with the coming dawn." She looked at me with a nod of deep respect. "You have done Morthal a service beyond measure, vigilant. We will never forget this." Her housecarl handed me a small pouch of coin, a reward from the hold, and I bowed, accepting on behalf of the vigil, and assured them that it would go toward aiding others in need. Villagers gathered round as Brother Thane recounted in awe how he discovered the evil and fought it tooth and nail. He held up the silver relic of Stendar's hammer like a talisman of hope. Though I was loath to be lauded, I allowed them their moment of catharsis. After weeks of terror, they needed to celebrate their victory. Yorick, the skeptical hunter from the inn, clapped me on the back. I misjudged you, Vigilant. You did right by us. Thank you. I simply nodded, offering him a weary smile. Your ringing of the chapel bell gave me the strength what I needed the most, I pointed out Brother Thane, and the priest flushed. But I really did mean every word. That brave act might have saved me. We spoke of the vampire Cunnan's cunning. It became clear that the smuggler Elvin had likely been a fiend in disguise all along, or a thrall from earlier times. No one in the town really knew him well. He arrived a few months back, ingratiating himself quietly. A perfect spy and agent for the Coven, earning their trust, only to betray them. The townspeople were aghast at how close evil had lain them to a friendly mask. It was a sobering lesson, one that I took myself to heart, that's for sure. One guard reported finding a second pile of ashes deeper in the crypt's tunnel, likely the last fledgling who tried to hide or flee when her master fell. But we'd confirmed no vampires remained to haunt Morthal, at least for now. The morning sun rose higher. Its rays streamed through the chapel door, dispelling that last clinging gloom inside. Brother Thane led a short service of thanksgiving and remembrance. We prayed for those who had been taken and lost. Some names had no living person to answer, implying not all victims survived or could be found. The townspeople lit candles for each soul, but despite the sorrow, there was hope in their voices now. When the prayers concluded, I stepped outside, fatigue weighing heavily upon me. The day was brightening, the mist evaporating. Guards had filled in the cursed crypt and sealed it. But Morthal felt different, still quiet, melancholy even. But some semblance of the oppressive dread had lifted, at least for now. By mid-morning, with the immediate crisis tended to, I knew it was time for me to continue my journey. The people of Morthal offered me a warm bed for the day and a feast to come that evening, but I politely declined. A vigilant's life is on the road, and there were others in Skyrim who might need Stendarr's hand as urgently as Morthal had. After a final check on Hafnar and Fiona, both resting, surrounded by loved ones, I gathered up my things. Brother Thane met me near the town gates. In his arms he carried a fragment of Stendarr's hammer wrapped in linen. "This belongs to you now," he insisted. I opened my mouth to protest. Surely such a relic should be safeguarding the chapel, but he raised a hand. "No, Vigilant, please. You proved yourself its rightful bearer. Let it travel with you, that our gratitude travels with it, and may it smite evil wherever you roam." I accepted the heavy relic with a deep bow of reverence, strapping it securely to my back. It would serve as a reminder of Morthal's deliverance, and perhaps I'd use it in battles yet to come. A small crowd gathered to see me off. The Jarl offered formal thanks once more, and her housecarl handed me a sealed letter. A recommendation to the nobles of any hold, should you need aid or hospitality, the Jarl explained. Such an honor was beyond my expectation. I was grateful and humbled. Fiona, pale but standing with newfound courage, pressed a wooden carving into my hand, a tiny figure of a moth. "I carved it from the old birch by the chapel," she said softly. "Moths are said to carry the souls of the departed to Aetherius. Let this one remind you of those you saved, and those you still seek to save." I closed her fingers around mine briefly in thanks, promising to treasure it. And with farewell said, I set out along the winding road leaving Morthal. The morning sun was fully ablaze, burning away the last tatters of mist and fog, and each step I took felt lighter than the last as the distance grew between me and them. lighter with relief that their nightmare was truly ended. Yet, I carry the deep weight of the knowledge that my work is never truly done. Behind me, Morthal would heal and continue, scars and all. Before me, the open roads of Skyrim beckoned, and with them, no doubt, new evil to confront. My friend, I pause in my recounting now, gazing into your intent eyes across this tavern table. The fires burned low, more embers casting long shadows. And so, that is how the worshippers of Morthal were saved, and how the hidden fangs of the night were pulled from their midst. You release a breath you'd been holding. I can tell the tale gripped you. It still grips my own heart. Outside the tavern's walls, the wind howls softly. Perhaps a reminder that Skyrim's darkness is ever near, held at bay by brave souls and bright hearts. What did I do next? Well, there's always another evil, my friend. I tell you of rumors I've heard, a coven of Daedra worshippers staring trouble near the border of High Rock, whispers of a child's laughter echoing at midnight in an abandoned home in Windhelm. My path is set to investigate these and more. Perhaps I'll tell you about them one day. But one thing is sure, the vigilant of Stendarr never rests while abominations roam free. Wherever the innocent suffer and the wicked prey, I will go. Stendarr's light will guide me through the darkness. Rising from my seat, I place a few septums on the table and clasp your shoulder warmly. Thank you for listening. May the Eight protect you on your own road. I leave you then, pulling my cloak against the chill as I step outside. Over the eastern mountains, dawn approaches yet again, painting in the sky promise. I take a deep breath of the crisp air. Evil may lurk in every shadow, but as long as I draw breath, none shall go unchecked. And so with Stendarr's symbol at my breast, and the taste of victory still sweet, I carry on into the morning, into whatever battle awaits me. Perhaps death, but still, faithful, unyielding, I am ready to face the darkness, wherever they gnash their teeth. I knelt down before the Night Mother's shrine, head bowed deep in the depths of our hidden sanctuary. The stale air smelled of candle wax and dried blood, a comforting aroma, at least to me it is. The silence was only broken by the faint drips of the water in distant tunnels and the steady thump of my heart as I awaited my next task. Out of that gloom, a familiar voice delivered the news. A contract, issued for a prominent priest in Solitude's Temple of the Divines. A high-profile target, it seems. One who preached in the very heart of the imperial capital of Skyrim. It was an audacious assignment. I felt excitement, but dread in equal measure. Solitude, that's not an easy game. I lifted my gaze to the withered corpse of the Night Mother, resting within her coffin at the chamber's center, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon me. To kill a temple priest discreetly, and in solitude no less. The challenge alone, that made my pulse quicken. Still, I was of the Dark Brotherhood, and bound by honor to fulfill such tasks. My name is Lyra, though few outside the Brotherhood know that. Years ago, I was a lost soul on Riften's streets, surviving by blade and by bitterness. But one fateful night, I spilled blood in revenge, and that was when the Brotherhood found me. Someone finally offered me what I lacked: family, purpose, and a creed. From that day on, every contract has been penance and promise that I shall serve Sithis and obey the Night Mother's will, no matter the cost. But this contract, it felt different. I sharpened the edge of my dagger in the torchlit chamber, and a heaviness hung in the air that I couldn't quite name. Nazir, our seasoned Red Guard handler, approached and pressed a parchment into my hand. "This one's delicate," he warned quietly, arms folded. "Solitude's no warm den for our kind. You know that. Watch yourself." I unraveled the scroll and scanned the details. Roerland, High Priest of Solitude's Temple of the Divines. The client demanded subtlety, a silent kill, made to look like an accident or illness. They didn't want to spark any immediate chaos. I nodded back to Nazir and tucked the parchment away. Solitude was the center of imperial power in Skyrim, crawling with soldiers and guards. They'd love to catch a servant of Sithis, maybe get a promotion or a bonus. But in any case, duty was duty, and we were bound to ours. Before departing, I stepped closer to the Night Mother's coffin, placing a gloved hand on the cold wooden lid, and I whispered, "By Sithis, I will obey." In the darkness, it felt as if an air itself had listened. With that oath binding me, I slipped away from the sanctuary and set out in the night on the path to solitude, where perhaps my fate awaited me. The journey north was uneventful, but my mind churned with possibilities and perils the entire way. I traveled under the guise of a humble pilgrim, a plain hooded cloak draped over my dark leather armor, and a wooden amulet of the divines hanging from my neck to deflect any suspicion. The irony of wearing the symbol of the 8 divines as I plotted to kill one of their own priests. It's not lost on me. Beneath the homespun cloak, my hand never strayed far from the hilt of my dagger. I suppose old habits die hard. Well, in my line of work, they seldom die at all. By dusk, I reached the outskirts of Solitude, gazing up at the colossal rock arch that cradled that city. The silhouette of Solitude's spires and the blue palace loomed against a dimming sky, streaked with the last orange light of sunset. High stone walls encircled that city, stoic and imposing. Banners bearing the imperial dragon flapped gently in the evening breeze. And even from a distance, I heard the clang of the closing gates and the muffled hum of life of those within the walls. Solitude, the jewel of the north, just as grand as I remembered. But to me it was beautiful in a way that a gilded cage is beautiful. As for gaining entry, that was pretty simple. I slipped in with a caravan of merchants and returning legionnaires at the gate, and the guards barely gave me a second glance. Inside the walls, Solitude bustled with evening life. Warm lights mingled aromas of hearth and harbor. For a moment I almost pretended that I was simply a weary traveler, bound for a cozy inn. But that comfort passed quickly. I had to remind myself I was not here for safety, nor rest. I was here to walk in the shadows and spill blood. I secured a small rented room at the Winking Skeever Inn, amid the tavern's lively music and chatter. I listened intently to local gossip and gleaned any useful information. I learned that High Priest Roerland often gave evening sermons and tended to stay late in the temple's inner chambers after closing. That would be my window of opportunity, when the temple was empty of worshippers and only the priest remained, likely with a single novice or guard. Night settled. I slipped out of the inn. I made my way toward the temple district. As I passed an alleyway near the Bard's College, a flicker of motion in the corner of my vision made me tense. A shape detached itself from the deeper shadow by a stack of crates. My hand drifted toward my concealed dagger, every instinct on edge. But then a low whistle sounded, following a tune only a Brotherhood member would know. The macabre lullaby often hummed in our sanctuary halls. Immediately I eased my stance, and from the darkness emerged Galen, a fellow Brotherhood assassin, his face partially obscured by a shadowed cowl. "Snowhawk," he greeted me softly, using the code name I'd earned long ago. I hadn't expected to see another of my brothers here, least of all Galen. By Siphus, what is he doing in solitude? I inclined my head in cautious acknowledgement. "Galen," I whispered back, eyes narrowing. I was not aware that this contract required 2 blades. He offered a thin smile. In the dim glow of a distant street lantern, I noticed his hand resting casually on the pommel of a short sword at his hip. "The Night Mother's word travels swiftly," he replied. "Our listener thought you might appreciate some assistance, especially on a contract of this magnitude." His tone was light, but just something about the way he said it tugged at my gut. Perhaps it was the slight pause before "listener," or the way his gaze flickered past me to scan the street, as if he were checking if we were truly alone. A prickling weariness crept through me. I knew him from past jobs. Sure, he was competent, resourceful, if a bit brash. We rarely worked in pairs, us Dark Brotherhood members, unless a mark was exceptionally well guarded. And this target hardly warranted 2. Unbidden, I recalled that not long ago Galen had grumbled about being passed over for big contracts. Was his sudden help truly brotherly concern? Or was there an ulterior motive glinting in his eyes? "You came all this way to help me?" I asked under my breath, probing gently. Galen chuckled. "Solitude's a grand city. I wouldn't mind a taste of its hospitality, sure. But, truthfully, the listener has been cautious since we lost the Falkreath Sanctuary. We can't afford any failures. I was already operating in the Reach when word came, so I thought I'd volunteer to ensure success here." That explanation seemed plausible enough. Still, the timing was pretty suspicious. The contract was assigned only a few days ago, and he managed to arrive the same night as I did. Either Galen was extraordinarily swift, or he'd known about the contract well in advance. I had to weigh up my options pretty swiftly. If the Night Mother, through the listener, truly sent him, spurning a brother's aid, well, that would be unwise. Yet, if he wasn't sent, I swallowed my doubts. Paranoia can keep you alive in our trade, sure, but it can also sow deadly discord. For now, I chose the middle path. Accept his presence, but keep my eyes open. Watch my back. "All right," I murmured, nodding begrudgingly. 2 blades in the dark, then. Just remember, Galen, subtlety is key. No unnecessary risks. You got it." Galen flashed that quick grin of his. "Subtlety's my second nature." He briefly drew back his cowl, revealing the familiar sharp angles of his face and short dark hair, and then pulled it up again. I'll watch the perimeter, while you handle the priest. If things get ugly, or guards are alerted, leave it to me to cause a diversion. Perhaps a little fire down the street. That'll draw their eyes away. Oh, and if you need an extra hand... He patted the crossbow slung over his back, a favorite weapon of his for quiet kills at close range. I gave him a final look, trying to read the shadows hiding in his expression. Just be careful. In and out. Then meet at the city gate before dawn. As you say. Galen dipped his head in a small bow, almost mockingly. In the next blink, he melted back into the alley's darkness, as if he'd never been there at all. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and continued on my path toward the temple, now fully aware that I was not alone on this mission. Was I relieved? I wasn't sure. Galen's presence was unexpected, that's to say the least, and it could either be a blessing or a curse. My instincts nagged at me in warning, though, but I forced my focus back to the task at hand. One way or another, someone was going to die tonight. The streets were largely empty now. A few Solitude guards patrolled with torches in hand, their boots clanking on the cobbles. I kept to the inky shadows of the archways and stone stairwells, moving with precious silence. Solitude's winding lanes can play tricks with sound, you see. One careless step can echo loudly at night. So I placed each foot carefully, gliding along those edges where my soft boots made the least noise. Soon, the marble steps of the Temple of the Divines rose before me. Twin braziers flanked the entrance, their flames casting flickering light on the engraved reliefs of the 8 divines carved into the great wooden doors. A haze of incense hung about the place, sweet and heady. That's a familiar scent. Through a cracked door, I caught the gentle melody of a hymn. A handful of late worshippers were still inside, finishing off their prayers. Pulling my hood low to obscure my face, I ascended the steps at a humble pace, adopting the slouched posture of a weary pilgrim rather than a predator. If any guard or citizen noted my passing, they would see only a devout traveler arriving for some last-minute worship. Inside, the temple was aglow with hundreds of candles. The high-vaulted ceiling caused every whisper and shuffle to reverberate softly. I lingered near the door, head bowed in feigned prayer, and remained unnoticed as the final hymn concluded. At the front of the hall stood the man that I'd come to kill, High Priest Roland. There he is, garbed in the flowing white and gold vestments, leading that closing benediction. He was middle-aged, with stern Nordic features and a neatly trimmed beard, his voice deep, carrying through the nave with practiced grace. Beside him stood a young priestess, blonde, his acolyte, head bowed reverently. When the hymn came to an end, Roland offered a final blessing to the few citizens present. I dipped my chin and murmured along. Soon, the handful of worshippers began to depart, footsteps echoing as they made their way out of the temple. Kindly old woman even shot me a glance and nodded as she passed. I returned the gesture with a smile. Within minutes, the temple had emptied completely, leaving only the high priest and his attendant conversing quietly near the altar. And this was when my pulse quickened. The moment was fast approaching. I kept my head down. I glided behind a stone pillar along the side of the hall, as if examining the tapestries. From this cover I surveyed the grand interior. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the altar, and shrines to the divines lined the walls. Colored moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows above, casting dim hues across the floor. I noticed one pedestal stood empty, the shrine of Talos, removed by imperial decree. Even this holy place bore the stain of political compromise. No need to think about that now. Focus. There, on the left wall, was a side door leading to the priest's quarters, and perhaps an undercroft. That would be my exit after the deed. The main doors behind me were too exposed. My plan was simple. Eliminate Roland swiftly, and slip out through the side door before the acolyte, or anybody else for that matter, knew what happened. If I was fortunate, she would assume the priest had suffered a sudden heart failure in solitude, or at least I'd be gone by the time anybody found the body. But patience now. I decided to wait for the acolyte to leave the room. Roland was my target, not this young girl. So I knelt at a shrine to Julianos, the god of wisdom. How fitting. And I bowed my head, pretending to pray for a few more moments. My ears pricked up at their conversation. Before long, Roland gently dismissed the young priestess for the night. The acolyte, Freya, I recalled, obediently departed through a side door behind me. I kept my face down. My lips moved in silence, a bogus prayer, until I heard the click of the door and the footsteps fade away. Now the high priest was all alone. I rose from my knees of deliberate slowness, my eyes locking onto Roland's back. Unaware of the fate looming behind him, he was busy at his altar, snuffing out a few candles, rolling up a scroll of scripture. In the emptiness of the temple, his soft humming echoed. The only witnesses were now the statues of those divines gazing from their alcoves, and if my brothers are to be believed, the Night Mother herself, through mine own eyes. I drew a shallow breath and crept forward, keeping to the shadowed edge of the aisle. My hand slipped inside the cloak to grip the hilt of my dagger. It was a fine piece of steel, its edge coated for a swift-acting toxin, just in case. As I approached the unsuspecting priest, my footsteps were as silent as a panther's on the hunt. But Roland must have sensed something in that last instant. A change in the air, a presence of a something behind him. For he began to turn. But it was too late. In one smooth motion I lunged forward, clamping my gloved hand over his mouth to cut off any cry for help. His body jolted in alarm, and with savage precision, I drove the knife into his back, aiming upwards toward his heart. The blade sank between his ribs with a soft and brutal crunch. Roland jerked violently. A muffled, desperate grunt pressed against my palm as the warm blood flowed over my fingers. But his struggle was brief. In a few heartbeats, the priest's strength began to flee from his body. I eased his limp form to the floor, white robes now staining red. The high priest of solitude had uttered his last prayer. I allowed myself one taut breath of a grim satisfaction, but there was no time to linger. I needed to vanish before the acolyte, or anybody else for that matter, discovered the body. Stepping over Roland's corpse, I hastened toward the side door leading out of the sanctum. But there was a problem. It was locked. My stomach sank at the unexpected resistance of the handle. Freya had left through this door moments ago. Had she locked it behind her, out of habit? I jiggled it softly again, but it refused to budge. A prickle of unease ran up my spine. Suddenly, a sharp noise shattered the silence. A bolt of a crossbow, slicing through the air. Only instinct saved me. I dropped into a roll on the cold marble floor, and an instant later, a quarrel hissed past where my head had been. A steel bolt clanged off a wall and skidded across the floor with a shrill ring. I sprang up from my roll in a low crouch, heart pounding, dagger raised in defense. My eyes darted through the darkness, and a figure stepped out from behind a column across the nave, an outline of a drawn crossbow in his hands. In the faint candlelight, I recognized the cowed silhouette. Galen. He had a sly smile on his lips as he advanced a few paces into the open, crossbow aimed at me. My heart raced in confusion and growing fury. Why in oblivion had he fired at me? For a heartbeat, I wondered if perhaps a guard had spotted us and he'd actually been aiming at them. But the bolt had came from inside the temple. Surely it was meant for me. The realization hit me like icy water. This was betrayal. My voice dropped to a deadly hiss. "What are you doing, Galen?" But Galen did not lower the crossbow. He moved in with slow and confident steps, using one of the temple's large support pillars as potential cover. In his eyes, I no longer saw the warmth of Brotherhood, only cold intent. He looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said softly, but there was nothing apologetic in his tone. He continued, "Your part in this tale ends here." My blood turned to ice. Before I could respond, a tremendous crash came from the main entrance. The great double doors of the temple flew open, slamming against the walls. Golden torchlight flooded the candlelit gloom as multiple armored figures charged inside. "Stop! Murderer!" a voice bellowed. 3 Solitude guards rushed in with swords drawn, an officer at the head to lead them. His eyes took in the grisly scene. The high priest's corpse, with me crouched beside it, a bloody blade in my hand. To them, the picture was clear. A murderer caught red-handed right at the scene. "Drop your weapon, now," the captain barked. A 4th man in light armor, likely a Penitus Oculatus agent, pushed in behind the guards, gaze locked onto me. This was no chance discovery. This was an ambush. Galen. The locked door, the timed arrival. It was all his doing. My brother had led me into a trap and was now slipping away amid the chaos. In all the confusion, Galen had darted back into the shadows along the side of the hall. I caught a glimpse of him moving slowly toward the rear balcony stair, escaping. I was left to take the fall. Rage was flaring hot inside me. He would not get away with this. But I had no chance in a fair fight against them, not in these close quarters. They thought they had me trapped. Yield, assassin. the captain shouted, inching closer with his sword raised. Yield? I nearly laughed at the thought. I do not yield. I act. My free hand plunged into the pouch of my belt and hurled a small glass orb at the ground. It exploded with a pop, instantly blanketing the nave in choking grey smoke. Cries of alarm erupted from the guards as the dense cloud swallowed everything. In the same heartbeat, I sprinted toward the nearest wall and leapt onto a narrow windowsill ledge. With a grunt, I kicked off the wall and caught the edge of the second-floor balcony railing above. My muscles screamed in protest as I hauled myself up, but the adrenaline gave me strength. Below, I heard coughing and shouted orders. Steel clashed against stone. One of the guards must have been swinging blindly through the smoke where I'd been seconds before. But keeping low, I dashed along the balcony toward the back of the temple in the same direction I had seen Galen fleeing. There, a door stood ajar at the end of the balcony, leading out onto the roof. Galen had left it open during his flight. Without hesitation, I slipped through it, emerging into that cool night air atop the Temple of Divines. Under the cold light of a waning masser hanging low in the sky, the rooftops of Solitude became my new battleground. I found myself on a sloped section of roof just behind the temple's grand central dome. The air was brisk, tinged with sea salt from the cliffs below the city, and my breath came out in clouds. From this height, Solitude's skyline spread before me in flickering torchlight, the jagged outline of Castle Dower to my left, the blue palace's dome to my right. Far beneath, dismayed shouts echoed as guards poured out of the temple, sounding the alarm. But up here among the spires, it was just me, the stars, and the traitor. Galen stood a short distance away on the same rooftop, his dark figure outlined against the starry sky. His crossbow was loaded again and leveled at me. At the sight of my emergence, he gave a slow, almost cordial nod. Persistent, aren't we, Lyra? He called out, voice calm as if we were discussing the weather. You always were hard to kill. I rose into a stance of defense, sliding my blooded dagger back into its sheath and drawing out my longer, curved sword instead. My heart was hammering, but anger steadied my hands with resolve. And you, I spat across the gap between us, you are a disgrace to the Brotherhood. You are a disgrace to Sithis and the Night Mother. You've betrayed us all, Galen. He chuckled and began sidestepping lightly along the roof's peak, each of his boots finding short purchase on the tiles. The moonlight etched his features in silver, narrowed eyes, a sheen of sweat on his brow. Spare me the righteous fury. This isn't about the Brotherhood. Not anymore. This is about my survival. My survival. Our little family. That's a sinking ship. Hunted in disarray. I chose to save myself before it drags me under, framing you as a rogue assassin acting on some political agenda. That will curry me enough favor with certain powerful friends of mine in the Empire. I've already set it all up. I'll be the hero who stopped you, the renegade killer. Solitude gets its scapegoat. I get a clean slate and a big pile of gold. So that was it. He was going to offer me up to the Empire to buy his own freedom, the coward. My jaw tightened in rage. Any lingering hope I was mistaken about him certainly crumbled away. Galen had made his choice. And what if the Night Mother's will, I growled, creeping a few steps sideways myself. My boots gripped the steep roof tightly, but I knew one misstep could send me plummeting into the courtyard below. You spat on everything we stand for, Galen. Sithers will have your soul for this treachery, I swear it. Galen's expression twisted in scorn. The Sithers? The Night Mother? Her rotting corpse in a box. Don't be an idiot. There's no family anymore, Lyra. Only death, and those are too weak to escape it. His knuckles whitened as he re-aimed the crossbow at my chest. Speaking of which, Lyra, your time has come. He fired. I hurled myself into a sideward roll along the sloping tiles as the bolt hissed past, barely missing my thigh. That was a close one. The quarrel clattered on the rooftop and vanished into the night. But before he could reload, I surged to my feet and charged. Steel met steel with a shower of sparks as I swung my sword at him, and Galen drew his sword blade to parry. His force of our clash on the narrow rooftop, it nearly sent us both sliding. But we each adjusted just in time. We traded blows in swift succession, steel ringing out in the starlight. Galen fought with the frantic ferocity of a desperate man, and I with the wrath of betrayal. He suddenly drove a savage kick toward my knee. Pain jolted up my leg as his boot connected, sending me reeling for a heartbeat, just enough for him to press his advantage. Galen lunged, and I raised my sword, just a hair too slow. His blade raked across my forearm, and blood welled under my sleeve. I could feel it dripping out. I hissed at the pain. He was trying to wear me down. One slip on these tiles, and I'd fall to my death. He knew it as much as I did. Galen snarled through his gritted teeth. You should have stayed dead in the shadows of that sanctuary, followed up by a flurry of quick strikes. Now you'll die out here in the open like a dog, and the world will believe that the whole Brotherhood died with you. He slashed viciously at my ribs. I danced back, and his sword whistled through the empty air. I gripped my blade tighter, anger and adrenaline surging. As Galen recovered from his missed swing, I saw an opening and struck low. My sword sliced across the back of his knee, cutting through leather and reaching the flesh. Galen cried out and staggered, one leg collapsing beneath him. I took my chance, and without hesitation, I kicked his fallen crossbow farther down the roof and advanced. He was hurt. He was on one knee now, desperately trying to regain his footing. Moonlight showed agony etched on his face. He swung his short sword wildly as I closed in, but I easily knocked his weakened arm aside with my own blade. This was it. No need to prolong it. Galen had made his choice. I lunged forward and drove my sword through his side. A sharp steel slid beneath his ribs. He gasped, a wet, pathetic, strangled sound. For a heartbeat, we were face to face. I could see the fear and the life fading from his eyes. For the Night Mother, I whispered to him, looking directly into his eyes as I twisted the blade. This is her will, not yours. Galen opened his mouth, as if to speak or to beg, but nothing emerged except for a death-rattling gurgle, and with a final burst of effort, I ripped the blade from his body. He gave a shuddering gasp. His balance teetered, and he toppled backwards over the ledge of that roof. I had a fleeting glimpse of his form disappearing into the darkness below, but then nothing. A dull thud echoed a moment later from the courtyard, and I knew the traitor was dead. For a long moment I stood there on the rooftop, chest heaving and bloodied sword in hand. My arm throbbed where he'd cut me, my leg radiated pain where he'd kicked. But I was alive. I'm still standing. A breeze wailed through the silence, cutting away the cloud cover and revealing a spray of cold stars overhead. I closed my eyes. I let out a breath I'd held for what seemed like eternity. The Night Mother's true will had been done this night, though not in a way that any of us had expected. As for me, I did not linger. Down below, the temple guards were a chaos of torches and shouting. They hadn't realized yet that their assassin was above them, or that Galen had already met his end. I cast one last glance over Solitude's roofs, and then darted off into the night, determined to salvage what remained of any future I had. I fled across Solitude's rooftops while the guards hunted in vain below. At the base of the outer wall, I found a loose iron grate. I pried it open and crawled through the foul drainage tunnel. Moments later, I emerged outside, bruised, bloodied, covered in the divines knows what, but free. Dawn found me miles away, astride a swollen bay horse galloping hard down the road south. With each mile that stretched between me and Solitude, the weight on my shoulders lightened, just a fraction. But there was a new weight that replaced it, the weight of Galen's betrayal. The Dark Brotherhood, that had always been my refuge, a secret family where trust was sacred, and now one of our own, had nearly orchestrated my downfall, selling me out to our enemies to save his skin. I would have to inform the others, make sure no serpents lurked among us. When I finally returned to the sanctuary, I was greeted with gasps of relief. News of the Solitude bloodshed had already reached my brothers and sisters. Drained from my ordeal, I recounted Galen's treachery and everything that transpired in that temple. They listened with a mix of sorrow and anger, which all turned to a steely resolve. Betrayal would not break us. It would only forge our bonds stronger. After I finished my tale, I knelt once more before the Night Mother's coffin. My family formed a somber circle around me, torchlight throwing their shadows tall on the walls, and I closed my eyes, letting the final images of that night swirl in my mind. Roland's final breath, the glint of Galen's crossbow in the dark, the clash of blades far above Solitude. All of it had been for this moment. In the silence, I could almost feel the Night Mother's cold presence nearby, acknowledging what had been done in her name. I spoke softly, in that still air. "Sweet Mother, your will is done. The deceiver lies slain." The words were both report and prayer. In my mind's eye, I imagined the Night Mother smiling in dark approval as Sithis received a traitor's soul. Not every victory in the Brotherhood is clean. We had purged a traitor from within and fulfilled the contract, but it cost me a piece of my trust. In our trade, betrayal cuts deeper than any blade does. Still, as I rose and felt my siblings' reassuring hands on my shoulders, one thing remained. We endure. The Dark Brotherhood endures. And I am an assassin of the Dark Brotherhood, hands stained with blood both given and taken. I walk in darkness, and even among family, I have to remain vigilant. solitude sought to swallow me in treachery, but I survived by wits and my loyalty. As for Galen's betrayal, that reminded us all that deceit can fester anywhere. But the Night Mother's will always prevails. I remain, blade in hand, a silent instrument of Sithis. As I cleaned my blade and tended to my wounds, I pondered the path ahead. There would likely be questions in solitude, but they wouldn't find anything. Perhaps they would assume the assassin fell to his death. That's a convenient story. Let them believe it. In the flickering shadows of our hideout, my brothers and sisters reaffirmed our bond. We'd lost one of our own, but in truth, Galen was lost to us before that first drop of blood was spilled. We'd recover, rebuilding trust from the ashes of treachery. And so, with renewed purpose, I pulled up my hood and stepped out into the pre-dawn gloom outside the sanctuary. Contracts would come and go, that's for sure, and I would kill again in the name of Sithis, but never blindly. I'd stared into the ugly face of betrayal, survived its bite. The night was my ally once more. In the end, only one thing is certain in this world of shadow. The Dark Brotherhood lives, and I live to serve it, bound by blood, trusting only in the eternal embrace of the night.